right. All right. Welcome back. Right. So yeah, so we are halfway through the course, a little bit over halfway, and so in the first half of the semester, we focused our attention on implementing a client application, right? In a client server application, right? We focused mostly on the client side, implemented as a React.js web application, right? Running on Node.js that hosted our application. And now in the second half of the semester, we're focusing on the on the server side of this client server application. And then next week, we're going to focus on adding a database, a MongoDB database, which will serve as our long-term storage solution, right? And so yeah, so we're focusing on the server. Last week we learned how to implement an HTTP server using Node.js. I mean, we had already been using Node.js for hosting our React.js application, but mostly just that, right? It was hosting, HTML documents, CSS documents, JavaScript documents. So, just static ASCII files, right? And so now we're focusing on making that content coming from the server be dynamic, right? We were focusing on the server, sending us static documents, which then executed on the browser, right? The JavaScript ran on the browser, it manipulated the DOM, right? And we had all this dynamic graphical user interface. And so in the second half of the semester, we're focusing on the server being more dynamic, right? Being able to, just like we were able to compute user interfaces in the browser on the client, on the server, we can also do some computation. And so we focused all last week on implementing an HTTP server, implementing routes, right? That we could, invoke sending an HTTP request to the server. The server could parse data from the URL, do some simple calculations, right? And then respond with the result of that calculation, right? And then we discussed how to, grab all those skills and integrate our React application that we've been working on for the last 2 months, thereabouts, right? And integrate it with a Node.js HTTP server, right? And using Ajax, using the Axios library, right? And we discussed that there's a particular syntax and some best practices and some naming conventions and how that protocol should behave, right? What the URL should look like, how to encode data either as parameters, as either query parameters or path parameters, or embedded in some JSON objects that we can post, right? We talked about some conventions that fall in the umbrella of RESTful APIs, right? That specify that you should only use nouns, plural nouns, and then encode primary keys in the URLs, right? That we should use post for creating new data, get HTTP get for retrieving data, put for updates, delete for removal. So we went over all that skill set and how to integrate with our React application with this Node server. So we're not gonna. I also mentioned that I would grab all these skills that we've gathered so far, right, and create a demo, a prototype of the final project that that is a requirement for this course, right? So that's what I'm going to do today, right? I'm going to create a prototype of a project, right? Based on the requirements, the documents that that we discussed earlier this semester, right? So this is going to give us a chance to review those requirements, right? I will demonstrate what I mean by some of those requirements, and so we can all make sure that we're all on the same page and understand the requirements correctly. Also give you a chance to ask questions and ask for clarification on any of those requirements. So please feel free to to ask for any questions you might have about the projects, right? Yeah, so that's the plan for today. So the assignment 5, you should be working on that. We started last week, so we have another week or so to finish that up. Last week we worked on the lab portion of the assignment, and earlier this week we worked on the Canvas, integrating it with a server, being able to create courses, delete courses, update courses, right? Integrating the React application with this new Node.js HTTP server application, right? So I shared the source code with the class. Feel free, make sure you take a look at that. Use that source code any which way you want. You can use that as your own. Use it as a beginning of assignment 5. I shared both the source code for the front end as well as the source code for the back end. That should give you a leg up to the lab 5, as well as getting you going with the Canvas application, how to integrate the two. And so yeah, so grab that, use it or don't, up to you. Let's see. Also, quiz 3 is I think is available now. So there's 2 versions of the quiz 3. Use the one that is just plain old Q3, right? And I think it has no password, so you should be able to start that anytime you want. That'll be available for the next several days. Take it anytime you want. Please don't do the other one, the other version. There are some errors there. Please avoid that one. I wasn't able to hide it for some reason. I'm not sure why Canvas doesn't let me hide it. What else? Yeah, you should be working on the project. You should have identified a team of folks that you want to work with for the remainder of the semester, and have identified a topic of interest that interests all of you. And the project asks you to build a small social network where you can all share information about this particular topic that you chose, right? And you already have plenty of skills to get going, right? That you can create the basic foundation of the main set of screens or pages, right? That you can start implementing navigation between these screens. You can create the basic components that display the screens for logging in, for registering, the profile screen, the landing page, the home screen, the how do you want to render certain things. So you can start working on that. It's obviously at first it might be all static, and you can have you can have dummy data, right, or mocked data that might represent what it is that you want to render, right? You can already implement objects and arrays that represent the data, and so that you can already style it and make it look presentable and professional. So you can do plenty, right? Even though obviously we haven't covered all the topics, right? But nevertheless, you can start setting up the groundwork. Just like we did the Canvas application, right? Even though we didn't have a database, we didn't have a server, that did not preclude us from implementing a user interface, focusing on making it look professional, presentable, right? And start talking about how to maintain state on navigation between multiple screens. So please, don't leave the project to the end. Start working as soon as possible. Right. So with that end, I am going to demonstrate today one of the I would say maybe one of the more challenging requirements in the assignment in this project, right, is interacting with a third-party API. I mean, for the last week or so, we've been implementing our own APIs, web APIs, right, using a Node.js server, where we create routes that we can send HTTP gets, posts, puts, deletes, that we can encode data in URLs or path parameters, and so that's an API that we have built, right, using Node.js, and with that we can interact from our React application. So the requirement here from the project is that yes, certainly you are going to have to build your own API for your own database and whatnot for your own project, but beyond that, you're also going to have to interact with an API that you don't own, that you don't control, that someone else owns, right? And so I'm going to demonstrate this skill, right, by interacting with Napster. Napster is a company that works with music, right? That they have access to a lot of interesting information about artists and albums and tracks, right? And anything that has to do with music, including album art and lyrics and music snippets that you can listen to. So I'm gonna build two of the screens that are required in the project. The project asks you to build several screens, of which two of them are perhaps one of the more challenging ones, and that is one screen that allows you to interact with a third-party API, that allows you to search, right, or send a query out to some third-party API, and then it can respond. You can capture that response, right, and render it somehow in a search screen. So we'll build a search screen today, and then a subsequent query, right, that allows you to ask more information, more details about one particular object in that result set, right? So for instance, if the topic is movies, right, you could type maybe Batman, right, and then it comes back with all the movies and TV shows and articles written about Batman, right, and in a long list, an array of result sets, and then each object in this result set typically is represented by a unique identifier. So you should be able to choose one of those objects and then link, right, use a primary key or unique identifier of that object, and then in a subsequent query, in a subsequent screen, render the details of that object, right? You might have that these details might include much more information, including maybe the plot of the movie. It might include the cast. It might include the director, the writers, right? Articles written, or maybe reviews written in Rotten Tomatoes and whatnot. So it can be a lot of information that can be in a subsequent query. So I will demonstrate these two screens, and just to give you an idea of what I mean by interacting with a third-party API, the search screen, the result set, the detail screen, and whatnot. Okay. All right. All right. Any questions? All right. So yeah. So let's get started. So let's review the API that we're going to be working with. So first of all, I've applied for an API key, right? That that allows me to interact with this API, right? And we'll see that in a minute. And the API allows me to then ask for information about all sorts of things that have to do with music. And the API is here is documented, fully documented in under metadata APIs, and you can ask information about artists or albums or tracks, genre, playlists, music stations, right? And they give you an example of what these URLs look like, right? In the overview, it shows you what the URL looks like, right? And then at the end of the URL of the domain, right? You can append, right, additional strings that allow you to ask for specific things, right? And then filter out in using various criteria. Right? So notice that they all start with v2.2. That's a very common thing to do when when you're implementing these APIs and you want folks to start using your API, right? And you're providing this really cool data set of information, and folks can write applications dependent on your data, right? So they're giving you perhaps an opportunity to monetize that data that you might own. And it's common to version these APIs so that you can stabilize the current version of that API, because there's people depending on that API, making sure that it behaves as documented, that you're not breaking it in any way, that and that you're changing its behavior over time, right? So they know that particular version, it behaves this particular way, and they can be certain to that they can build an application around that, right? If you want to move forward into a newer features and better implementations, then you can certainly start working on version 2.3, right? Without disturbing any prior implementations. So anyway, so these URLs, right? They then document what they look like. For instance, if you want to get a list of the top artists, right? You to that URL, you can append v22 artist top, right? So and then it comes back with a JSON object like this that you can then capture in your user interface, right? And render it in any which way you want, right? So for instance, this is an array of artists. So these are 9 artists. These are the top 9 artists, right? And so these are all objects. And they all have this unique identifier, right? That is identifying this specific artist, right? So this is Ed Sheeran. And so in a subsequent query, you could ask for more details about Ed Sheeran, right? Using this unique identifier. Now you can, certainly you can see how this is very similar to what we were doing last week and earlier this week of interacting with our own server, right? That was responding with JSON data. We just had to be able to capture that response, right? Store it in a state variable in React.js, and then iterate over the result set, right? So same thing here, right? We could grab the response, put it in a state variable called artists, right? And then iterate over the artist and render the bio, right? The name, the albums that they've written and whatnot, right? So we would have to see what the documentation of this is, right? So anyway, there's lots and lots of really cool information. I'm going to be working mostly with these two, albums and tracks, right? So albums allows you to, if you have the specific ID of the album, right, you can fetch a lot of information about that specific album. I guess that didn't work. So yeah, so we'll be using that API. Also, I'm going to be using this search API that is going to allow us to encode at the end of the URL using a query parameter, a search string, right? You can, or search term that we can provide this term that we encoded in the query. And then we can filter of how, what is it that we're asking for? Well, what are we trying to pattern match? We're trying to pattern match this term with an artist, with an album, with a particular song. What is it you're looking for, right? So for instance, this one is retrieving artists that meet the search query of Weezer, right? So these are the 9 artists, right, that match that particular query, right? And so we can iterate and maybe render this somehow, okay? Also, I am going to be using this other URL, this other endpoint of images, right? That you can ask for images of artists, right? Images of album art. There's tons of images that they provide that you can encode it using this URL, right? That says artist. You can, if you have the ID of the artist or the ID of the album, right? You can ask for that, and then the particular size and an image data type that you want, right? So here's an example of asking for an image, a JPEG image of a particular size. Now, these sizes are standard, right? So you can ask for, maybe small little images for a thumbnail, 70 by 70, or if you want something a little more bigger, right, to render on bigger monitors, right? So yeah, so I'm going to be using this API as well. Okay. So yeah, so with all this, let's first start by creating a placeholder for the project in our React application. I'm not going to use the server right now. It's only going to be the React application. I'm only going to need the server later next week when we want to, store some of this information in the database, right? Like somebody saying, as they're browsing through lots of songs and albums and whatnot, somebody might say, "Ooh, I like this song. I want to bookmark it," right? Or I want to, like it or give it a 4 stars. And so in that case, we're gonna need a mechanism for storing information about that album, right? That so and so was logged in and they liked that album. So for that we'll need our own API, right? Because all of these APIs mostly are read-only APIs, right? We can only read and consume data, but we cannot create data. There's nowhere for us to store any information about, who likes what, right? Who hates what, who wrote reviews for what, right? So for that, we're going to need our own APIs, right? And somehow we're going to have to relate this remote data that lives somewhere else in some other database related to data in our own database, right? So anyway, yeah. So first, let's create a placeholder. Let's go back to our code here. Let's move that over here. Okay. And let's open up the cs5610 5610 node, 5610 React web app. Okay, that one's it, right? Yep. Open that up. And let's see, what branch are we in? So we got git branch. Okay, so we are on branch 5. Okay, perfect. So, and I have some code there. Let me commit that. And I will push it so you have access to that, right? And I'm going to push that. Okay, so you have the latest. All right, so I'm going to create a different branch where I can work on the project. Right? So I'm going to say, git checkout project. Okay. And in that project, I'm going to create a directory called project where I can do all my project work. Right? So this is project. And I'll create a landing screen there. We'll say index.js, and this is project. So this will be, function project. So return, well, maybe something more than that. That, right? I'm going to export project. Okay, great. We can start this, npm start. And in our landing app.js, oh, it came up here with an error. Okay, so we're gonna, there we go, and probably want to make it, put it next to our code editor here. There we go. And we're gonna have a navigation so we can navigate to our app.js, right? So there we have app.js. Let me clear that. And we'll create let's import our project. So import the project. There we go. We'll create a route for this. We'll say route project, lowercase p. And we'll make that the default. Okay. All right, so let's go to default. It goes to the project. Perfect. Right. So this is the the wrapper of our entire project. Now we're going to have lots of different screens under the project. We'll have the home screen, right? The login screen, the profile screen, the search screen, right? So I'm going to put a project /star, right? So that the project can then deal with its own routing, right? Under the project here. Make sense? Now, under the project, we're going to have a lot of different screens, right? So maybe, we can have maybe the home screen, right? Maybe we can have the login screen. We'll have the, sign up screen. We'll have the profile screen. So we're going to have a lot of screens, right? And so each one with its own, function home, export home. We have a login. So this will be function login. There we go. Export. We'll have a profile. Profile. We'll have, what else we have? Sign up. Sign up. There we go. We have home, login, profile, sign up, and then in the project we can have maybe a couple of routes that allow us to navigate to the various places, right? And so maybe we can import all these things. So import home. We can import login, right? We can import sign up. And we're going to import the profile. And do we have anything else? Sign up, blah, 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 blah. What else? I think, well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we have those 4. And we can create routes so that we can navigate to the various places, right? So routes. And then we have the routes for, I guess, home. One for login, sign up, profile. Okay, there we go. And we'll need to import all these things, right? Routes and route. There we go. So notice that home is the default, and we should be able to navigate to all the different places, right? So project, we can go to login. Maybe not. Oh wait, no. Project /login, right? Login, right? Or profile. So we can navigate to different places. Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, but today I want to focus on a couple of screens in particular, right? Which are I would say one of the more challenging screens and requirements is to interact with a third-party API. Okay. So let's take a look at the API that we're interacting with. One of the main things is that we need a key, right, that you can apply for, which gives you access to their API. If you look at their documentation, right, if you go to the developer, you can look up developer and create an account with them, and you can create an application that you want to build with them, right? And they will give you an API key. Please don't use my API key. Please grab your own. And so we're going to need it in our React application, right? So I'm gonna build a screen where we can search, right? Do a search using the using this this query, this search here, right? I'm going to be using that so that I can retrieve data from them. And you need to provide the API key every time you interact with them, right? To say, yeah, you know me, right? So where do I put that key? So that key is a security related information, right? And no security information should be stored in your source code anywhere. It should be either stored in a environment variable, right, or file that is a protected file, but not in source code, because in source code, if you commit this information, anybody who has access to your repository can see, right, all these credentials and whatnot, right? So a good place to put it, right, is in an environment variable or environment file .env. Okay, so I'm going to paste that in there, and so now, how do I get a hold of this? Well, so what we could do is create a name value pair, right? That we can give this a name and then store it in a variable that we can then load it up from our application, right? So I'm going to give it a name. I'll call it Napster, API key equal the value. Now to load this information into our React application, this is equivalent to storing this information in your environment variables, right? If you're on Windows, right, you can search system, preferences, environment variables, right? And there you can create name value pairs, and then you'll be able to grab it from within your application, or if you're on Mac OS, you can store it in like bash profile or something like that, or also you can put it in a .env file in your project, right? This is a standard name of a file, right? The React.js application will know what to do with this and load up any declarations in there and make them available in the as a global variable, right? Anything that they declare in there. But for that to work, though, you have to append, right, a prefix, right, to the name of the variable, and so it needs to be exactly React app like that. React app like that. See that? And so any variables that start with React app, right, the React infrastructure will parse it, will grab the values and make it available to you. Right. So how do we grab it? So we grab it. So for instance, in the project, right, we can grab it by doing this. We can say, so let's put it in an environment. Let's put it in a state variable. So let's create a state variable. here, const key, set key. And right now, right, if we render that key, key home. Oh, I don't have use state. Let me import use state. There you go. So there it is. So it's home, right? So the value is in a variable called process env. So process env, right, is an object that contains all the values, right? All the values. Actually, we should be able to just render that, but it's an object, so careful, right? So it's an object that contains these guys, these name value pairs in there, right? So let's print it. Actually, here we can say, pre, and we can say JSON stringify, right? And we can display the process.env, and this is null, this is 2. There it is. Okay, so, but I don't see the variable that I was looking for, right? That's probably because I need to restart the server. Let's restart the server. When in doubt, restart the server. Okay, so let's stop this. Restart it. Starting. Okay, there it is. Right, my key is there available. So what's happening is that this here is really part of the node server. The node server has that global variable process.env. So what's happening here is that when this gets compiled from JSX, gets compiled to plain JavaScript, right? This is replaced with the actual values that are declared in your environment, right? And then you can pick out whatever value you want, right? Okay, so all right, so let's see. What do we want to do with that key? I need to provide that key every time I talk to the NAPSTER server, right? And the server says that the URL should look like this. Versions, latest. Okay, I don't want to use that. I mean, there's a default URL. It's something like napster.developer.something. I don't see here. Napster develop. I can't find it. Password grant authentic token overview. Your domain, blah blah blah. Domain implicit domain. No, it's not. Oh, is that it? Napster.com if possible. Accounts, localhost. Yeah, no, I think I have it here. Oh yeah, there it is. That is the URL. Okay, that is the URL. Let me copy that. So what we're going to do is that we want to navigate, right? We want to navigate to a search screen so that we can do some searching, right? So maybe we could create a small little navigation here, right? That allows us to navigate to all these places, right? So for instance, we could have a div, right, that has a list group, right, that has various navigation, right, and in here we can have various links, right, that allows us to navigate to the home screen. And let's I need to include that, right? Routes, we have routes link, there it is. And so there's the home, right? That should allow us to navigate home. And we can have several of these that allows us to navigate to the login, right? Or sign up, or profile, right? And this goes to login, and this is sign up. This is profile. Home is the default one. So this should allow us to go to all these. All right, perfect. And then we can, maybe configure a little bit so that we have, left side, right side. So we can maybe break it up into, a row that has maybe 2 columns. Like that, right? And maybe we can put the navigation on one end of the columns. And then on the right side, we can put all the routes over here, right? Okay, so now we can show on the right-hand side, login, home, sign up, profile, so we can navigate. Obviously, you also know how to, highlight these, right? But so you can give feedback to the user, right, on what is it that they're looking at. Yes? Okay. So one of the screens that we're going to build is the search and results screens, right? So let's build those placeholders. And since, and so we're going to call them maybe search JavaScript, right? And so this will be function search, right? And default there. And we'll create also a detail screen. So details. This is a function details. Let's see. All right. And we can add some navigation to those screens. So let's import them. So we'll need import search, and we'll need details like that. And we can create hyperlinks for these too, right? This is search, and this is details, and this is search, and this is details. All right. So search, search doesn't do anything. Oh, we need routes for them. Okay, so this is search, this is details. So this is details, this is search. There we go. So there we go. So let's focus first on searching. And probably we want to put maybe a class container. So we have some or maybe container fluid. Container fluid. There we go. Okay. All right. So yeah, so let's focus on search. And what we want to be able to do in search, maybe this is a little bit too wide. It's 10. So in search, what I like to be able to do is to search maybe for an album or for a genre or for a song, right? So let's create an input field, right, in the search where we can search. Right? We can say const a search term, right, and in a use state. And then maybe have an input field here. Input field that allows me to search, right? And allows me to edit that. I need that use state. So let's import those things, that. And maybe we can style it. So there's a form control. And maybe we can put a button at the end. Say, button search. And we can style it a little bit. This is maybe a button And then this is primary. Oops, primary. Like that. Maybe we can float it to the end. In the end, and maybe we can make the input field a little smaller. All right, so they're kind of like next to each other. And so I should be able to just, search for, Beatles. And that would query, right? So the search, according to the documentation, right, is going to be this URL appending the search at the end in a query parameter, right? So let's do that. So as we mentioned in earlier lectures, right, it's a good practice to put everything that has to do with communicating with a server, to put it in a separate file, right, and export it as a client that we can then use it in our user interface. So let's do that. So I create a file here. I'm going to call it client, and I do need the we do need the URL here, so I'm just going to grab that. So in here we're going to need the key, right? That URL and the key. We'll say const NAPSTER API, right? We're going to put it in a string like that. Okay. And we're also going to need the key because we need to concatenate, right? And so we can grab it, API key. We could have hard-coded it here, but again, it's a bad practice to put anything in the source code because, again, it's a risk other people can see it, right? So instead, we're going to load it from the process. So it's process.env, and I don't remember if that's the correct name. Is that correct name? env. It's that, right? I'm going to paste it. Yeah, so it's that one. Good. And I'm going to export this so we can see it from elsewhere. And so just to make sure that we do have access to this, let's go to the search screen and let's make sure that we can render this. What was it called? API key. Let's import it. Make sure that we can import it. So import API key naps, just that, right, from the client. And let's make sure that we can render that. Do we have it? Yeah, there it is, right? So we do have it. Okay, good. So what I want to do is grab that search term, right? Oops. I want to grab that search term, whatever you typed, right? And I need to create, we need to create this URL, right? If we metadata API, right? And if I want to search, I need to create this URL right there, right? So I need to create that local host. I mean, not local host, that Napster, .com, then /v2 search blah blah blah, whatever, right? So let's do that, right? So let's create a search, and search for albums. Like we can say type equal album, playlists, tracks, album, right? There's a whole bunch of different types, but I think album is one of them. So we can create in the client a function that says export const find albums, and I can pass a search term. And for this, I'm going to need Axios. So let's import Axios. And so I'm going to do const the response from Axios, Axios.get, and then the URL, it's the Napster API, and search albums. Is that correct? I don't know. Let me see. Search albums, search. I think it's just search. And there's a verbose version and a non-verbose version, right? So I'm going to use this instead. I'm going to grab this like that as an example, and I'm going to go back to my code. So it's a I'm going to paste that in there, right, like that. So this is the query. So that's going to be passed in whatever it is that I'm going to search, right? So this is a search term. So instead of this hard-coded Weezer example, this is going to be a search term like that, right? And then the type is I'm looking for albums, right? And then the response, I'm going to go back with just the data, that, right? Like that. Okay. So yeah, so this is very similar to what we did, all this week, but interacting with our own servers, right? This used to be, localhost something 4000. Whereas in this case, we're going to somebody else's URL, right? That they have made publicly available. Oh, V2 is already here, right? So I'm going to remove that. All right, so let's see what this does, right? So let's go back to our search screen, and what we're going to do is that we're going to put all our search results. So results here as in, and we're going to say null for now. We have no search results. And we're going to write a little function that fetches albums using that term, right? So it's going to use the client code that we just wrote. I'm going to import star as client from client. And so this is going to say, there it is. So find albums. So that's the function we just wrote, right? That one. And we need to pass in the search term that we just typed. It's going to come back with data, which is presumably albums. Let's see, right? Well, we don't know. Let's these are just results. So let's set the results like that and see what we get, right? The search term can have a default value, maybe Beatles, like that, right? Is this working? Beatles. Oh, the input fields, we did not set the default value. So the default value is search term. There it is. So there it is, Beatles, right? And what we can do is that when we search, we can say on click, right? We're going to invoke fetch albums, and we're going to pass it. Oh, we don't have to pass that anything, right? Because it already has it in the state variable search term, right? So we don't even need to do that like that, right? There we go. And then underneath we can display the results, right? We don't know the structure of the results, so I'm going to do just a JSON stringify, because I don't know what it looks like, right? So I'm just going to say stringify, and the results, it's null and 2. Okay, right now it's null, but let's search Beatles, right? And it gives us a 4 or 1. Okay. All right, so let's see what this came out to be. Let's look at the network. Let's try it again. Let's refresh. Let's go search. Okay, let's see. They came back as an error, unauthorized error. Oh, we never put the API key. Let's see what the URL looks like that we're sending before. So API, Napster, blah, 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 V2, search, query, Beatles, type albums. That looks right. I guess it really doesn't want to talk to us if we don't have an API key. So let's go back to our client and append this API key. So we'll do and, right? And API key. All right, so let's try that again. Maybe, no. Let's see, inspect. Let's go see the network. Put this at the bottom so we can. So let's search. Okay, so it went out. It said that it was successful. It didn't blow up, but we didn't get anything. So let's see what's going on. Response. Okay, so the response looks okay, right? It looks like we have a whole bunch of albums, but what's going on? Let's see. So on click, fetch albums, blah, 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 results. Well, I don't think are we doing anything with the result? We are, right? Yeah, JSON stringify results. Why are you in results? Results, set results, results. Huh? Fetch albums. Yeah, fetch albums. It is fetching them. It is fetching them. And what is it coming back with response.data? Response.data is in the results, and then we're setting it here, and we are rendering here. Why are you not showing that? What's going on? Search. No. And let's step through this. Let's step through it. Let's see. Source code. And let's open up the file search. There we go. We can put a breakpoint. And if we click on search, there it is. So there's our search term. Let's put a breakpoint right there. Continue. There's our results. Oh, undefined. Why is it undefined? Interesting. Let's try that again. Search. Let's go in. Oops, let's go back up. Let's go. Okay, there it is. So response, const. Oh. Okay, so this is not async. We didn't put async await. All right. Yeah, so when we do the next, right, the response is a promise. Right? And promise doesn't have, so response here is a promise, and there is no data, right, in the promise. There we go. Okay, yeah. So we forgot, right, and to make this asynchronous. So this has to be async, and this has to be an await. Yep. Okay, so let's try it again. Let's refresh. Search. There we go. Now we have the response. Good. So notice that the actual list of albums is under, it's buried under some data set, right? It's under search, under data, under albums, right? So we could do a few things. We could say, return the response.data dot search dot data dot albums, right? Let's try it again. There it is. So this comes back just with the arrays of albums, so that we can maybe just, iterate over it and display all the albums. And I don't know how many there are, but let's iterate over them. And the only thing that we're going to care about probably is this ID, the primary key, and the name, right? Because with the ID, that's enough to create an image. So image, you can create an image of an album like this, right? So you can create an image with the ID of the album, and then you can ask for a particular size, right? Let's see, there's a question on the chat. Or is it, why don't we need the async and await here? We do. Oh, was this earlier? Yes, we do need it. Thank you. So yeah, so let's do that. So we have the ID. So let's iterate over that array. Looks like that. So in our search, right, underneath, under our input field, we can iterate. So these are results, maybe in a UL if we want. So if there are results, we're going to iterate over the album object. We're going to display the album name, And the image, I don't know, do we have album images? Album images. I don't know, we have album images. No, my AI is not correct. The URL is actually, right, is documented here. That is what the URL looks like. So let's grab that. So the URL is, let's see, it's like that, right? The extension is we want a JPEG. The size, I think there's a common set of size. I think 300 by 300 is one of the standard sizes. And also the album ID is inside of the album object .id. So we can say, you know, album .id, and we can make this into an expression like that. I think that's it. And alternate, yada, yada, yada. Image, we have to close the line item, we have to close that, and we have to close the UL. And there they are. We have the results for these for Beatles, right? Yeah, so this is the beginnings of a small little prototype of what a search results screen might look like. Okay, and so the right, so that's the first portion, right, of the search part, right? We also need the details part, right? So and as I mentioned earlier, right, this would be for a subsequent query, right? That you would display more information about a particular album or artist or genre or playlist or whatnot, right? So let's do that. Let's we have a detail screen that goes here, right? But I want to be able to pass to the detail screen the ID, the primary key that is available in each album, right? So to do that, we're going to in the project, in the routes, right? We're going to say that we can't really navigate just to the detail screen, right? It would have to be the detail screen, but having encoded the ID of the URL. It makes no sense for you to go into the detail screen when you're not asking for any particular album, right? So the only real way to get into the detail screen is to provide the album ID, right, encoded at the end. Right? So this link really makes no sense that you can go into the detail screen, right, willy-nilly. So I'm just going to remove it. Okay. So how do we go there? You know, in your search screen, right, the images and the album name, these could be hyperlinks, right? So this could be hyperlinks, right, that go to project details like that. Yeah, perfect. And encode the album ID at the end. See that? And we can wrap these two in a link like that. Right, so that if we go to search and you search for Beatles, now these are hyperlinks, right? And if you click on these, notice that the ID is now encoded in the URL. Right? So that in the detail screen, you can now, you know, retrieve that ID. You know, you can parse it, const album ID with using use params. Right? And just to make sure that we are able to retrieve that ID, indeed we can retrieve the ID. Perfect, excellent. See, so that means that with that ID, I can, you know, using one of the other APIs, I can fetch, you know, more information, all sorts of meta information about this particular album, right? In the API, right? If you look at some of the metadata API, if we go down to albums, right? If you provide the ID, right, you can get the details of the album by going to this URL, right, and appending the ID of the album it'll give you an object that contains a lot of information about that specific album. Although, yeah, this is not working. So yeah, so let's copy that so that we can implement it. Right. So again, anything that has to do with talking to the server needs to go into a client file. Right. It's a good practice. It doesn't have to. But yeah, so notice my my trusty AI already knows what I'm going to implement. So I want to retrieve an album when I have its primary key. And is that correct? Let me check. V2 that's already encoded /album/album, very good. With the ID encoded in the URL, and then the API key. All right, that looks right. Album, I don't know what the how this is structured. I know data exists, so I'm going to first print out the response before I break it out, into exactly what I'm looking for. So in the details here, I get the ID, but I don't want to have to click on anything to retrieve the album, right? It has to be when I navigate to it, right? Now that I'm in the screen, it should automatically load up the information about that particular album. And for that, we can use the use effect hook, right? That runs once, right? Once the component is first loaded. We'll need a placeholder for the state variable that to hold the album as an object, and we'll need to import the use state. So we'll need use state. We'll also need use effect, right, which is going to allow us to run a fetch, right, and a synchronous call that first time. And let's make sure that in the client I am using a single wait. Yeah, very good. So yeah, so let me write a little function that fetches the album using the service, right, the client, which is, I think it's called find by album ID, and we're passing as an argument the album ID, and then we're setting the album. Now I don't know what this object looks like, but let's load it. We're going to load it on use effect. We're going to call fetch album, and we're going to display the content right here. So this will be pre and JSON stringify. We're going to print the albums or album. Okay, there it is, right? So there's their information. And indeed, the actual information is buried down under albums. And notice it's an array of 1 items, right? It's the only album that matches this particular primary key. There can only be 1, right? Which matches this ID right here, right? So I can change now my client knowing what this looks like. And I really only want not the whole data, but I want data dot albums, and then the first item in there. Okay, there it is, right? So once I have that, I can start displaying some details. So for instance, one of the things that I might do is that instead of having this title as saying details, this might be the album name, right? There it is, right? Now, so it worked this time, right? Because it had already loaded the data. But notice if I refresh, right, it dies, it breaks, right? And that's because in reality, when you first navigate here, right, and you're about to run this to go fetch the data from the server, the React.js code has already tried to render this content, right? Remember, this is asynchronous. We're not going to wait, right, for any of this to load, right? I'm not going to block. I continue doing my job. But the problem is that this hasn't been set, right? This is null initially, right? So we get a big null exception. So it's usually always good practice to wrap your code, your rendering code, with a conditional, right? That you should only render this, right? If this is not null or not undefined, not empty string, or length 0 or false or anything like that. So it is defined, right? And if it's so, then try to dereference, right? So we're going to move this into here like that. Now it's complaining because inside these conditional, you can only render one thing, not two. So you can just wrap it inside of a div like that, right? That. Okay, so notice that now if I refresh, right, it doesn't blow up, right? Because at first it's null, and so it doesn't render. But then when this fetch is done and we set the album, then it's not null anymore, right? And the state has changed. And when the state changes, then React.js causes the component to re-render a second time. Okay. All right. So something else that we might want to display here is the image, right? Where I think that's correct. Let's see. Oops, I need to close this. All right, there's the image. And you might want to display other things, right? When it was released, right? The label, the copyright, how many tracks, or a whole bunch of stuff, right? So yeah, that's some information that we might want about the album. Now there's much more information about the album that Napster provides, right? In particular, they have a tracks API, right? That if you know the URL, the ID of the ID of the album, it can come back with all the tracks, right? And so I think it's down here somewhere. Okay, there it is. Album tracks, right? So you can provide this URL, right? Providing the ID of the album, and then it can come back with an array that contains the tracks, right? So let's do that. Let's go back here and in our client, right, create a URL for retrieving the tracks, right? It's going to, let's see if this is correct. Napster API, albums, album ID, tracks, and the API key. Let's see if that's true. Albums, blah, 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 track. Yeah, my AI is correct. And so this response, again, I don't know what the actual what this actually looks like. So I'm going to first just display the entire data, and then I'll navigate to the particular property that I want, that I care about, right? So back in the details, I'm not only going to fetch the album itself, the object of the album, I'm also going to fetch the tracks. So I'm going to say, fetch tracks. Yep. Find class by ID, set the album. Okay, I don't have the tracks, so let's put a placeholder for that. So const tracks, first empty array, and so I'm going to set the tracks, right? And we're going to fetch the tracks, when we load. Okay. And so now we can display here what the tracks look like. Tracks. Okay, so the tracks look like this. We have an object underneath this tracks. My AI was right once again. So it'll be .data .tracks, right? So we're gonna say .data .tracks, right? Okay, now the tracks, this is just an array. Now we can iterate over that array and just display all the names of each one of the tracks in that album, right? So let's do that. So we can iterate over this under here. So we maybe say tracks, and this is a list group that we're going to iterate over the tracks. We're going to display each track in a line item, displaying the name of the track, right? It's suggesting that okay, so notice that it knows that instead of each track, there's a preview URL. You scroll down, you'll notice that each track has a preview URL that should allow us to play that track. So it looks like my AI is reading my source code in my Git repository. So this is going to allow us to play each one of those music tracks, line item, and then UL. All right, there they are. So these are the tracks, in that album, and this should play. Let's see. Can you hear that? I don't know if you could hear that. Can you hear that? I don't know if you can hear that. I know that sometimes Zoom, filters out any noise. So I don't know if you could hear that. So anyway, so we could totally play the music here, right? Now, in addition, notice that we're doing two asynchronous calls to the same database, right? But they're two separate calls, right? And there are asynchronous fetching data that we then come in here and we synchronize them, put them in, in state variables so that we can render them. Additionally to this, right, you would fetch data from your database, right? So you would be fetching things from the remote database using these URLs, plus you would be going to your database, right, to see if you have any information about that particular album. So in your database, you're going to have to maintain some data about this album, right? Well, not necessarily. Only if anybody has interacted with this album in any way, you would store that interaction in your database, right? So for instance, if somebody has liked this album or hated this album or written a review about the album, right, you would need to store that in your database. And use the key, this is a primary key, right, to tie that information together in your database so that you can create a URL of your own, a route to your database that might be called, fetch reviews or something, right? And then you pass the ID of the album to your URL, embedded in the URL, which you would then use to see in your database if somebody has written anything about, that particular album. Right? If nobody has written anything, that's fine, right? You just come back with an empty array and nothing gets rendered. But if somebody has visited this specific album, right, and they left a like, right, or they left a review or something, right, that will be stored in your database, and then we would fetch it, right, and then render it here. Make sense? All right, excellent. So let's go back now to the previous. Let's go back, right, and notice that we can immediately see one of the flaws, right, of our search screen. Notice that we search, and if we navigate, but then we go back, right, notice that it does not remember what it is that we searched for. See that? So that's a problem. A very common behavior in all web applications is that the back buttons and the forward buttons remember what's going on. So for instance, notice if I click on the forward button, look what happens. See that? It remembers that the details screen was rendering this information. Why not though when we went back? Why doesn't it remember? It should remember, right? Well, actually, no, it shouldn't remember. The reason this remembers is that the state, there's enough information in the URL, right, to recreate this page from scratch, right? So the remembering is being done by encoding state information in the URL. See that? So, which is used by the page, right, to parse that ID, and go fetch this data from the server. It's not being cached in any way here on the browser or anything, right? We're going out to the server again and fetching all that information and rendering it. So we want something similar, right, when we go back here to the search. But there's no information whatsoever, right? So notice that the rendering of the empty screen is mapped to project search. But when I search this, the populated screen is also mapped to the same project/search, right? So we should be able to distinguish between the two. When I first come in here and it's null and nothing's being rendered, and there's /search, I haven't searched anything, we have to distinguish that from having searched something, right? And it remembering that I have searched it, right? So the only way to do that is to encode that information in the URL and then use that information to do the query, just like we're doing in the forward, right? There's information in the URL that we can pluck out, right? And then do the search. We want to do the same thing, right? We want to be able to do this. We want to be able to include here, something like Beatles, right? Or remember that we had searched for Beatles, right? Beatles, right? Do the search, right? And then populate whatever previous search you had done, right? Notice that now there's nothing mapped to that, right? So it's not showing anything. So there's two versions of the screen. The version of the screen when I have searched something and I want to remember that search and I want to populate that content. And the other version of it is when I first come in here and it's empty and I haven't searched anything, right? In both cases, I want to be in the same screen, but the screen needs to behave in two different ways. If I haven't searched anything and there's nothing in the URL, this is the default. But if I have searched something, I want it as part of the URL and I want to populate, right? So both need to stay on the same screen, though, right? So how do we do that? So what we could do is that we can go to the route, right, in our project and say that this search command, this search screen, I want to render that screen in two different routes. When there's nothing, I want to render search. But if there is here, right, a search, okay, a search term, right, then I do want to grab it, right? So if I go M here, and also if I have something, I am in the same component, right? Now my code in that screen will be, if there's nothing, I'm not going to show anything. But if there is, I'm going to grab that parameter and I'm going to search. Okay, let's do that. Let's take a look at that, right? So search term, I think that's what we called it here. Yeah, we called the search term, right? Maybe we should give it two different names. So we'll call this just search. Okay, so in search, I'm going to grab the search. I'm going to say, const, I'm going to grab the search, and just search from the use params, which we're going to need to import. Use params like that. And I should be able to populate this. I should be able to populate this with the search, which if there's nothing there, it'll just be null, right? It's nothing there. Wait. Huh? Wait. Huh? Is it called search? It is search, isn't it? Search, right? Search params, state search. Why are you not populating it? Let me see. Search, is it rendering here? Okay, it is there. It's being populated. Oh, I know. Okay, yeah, I know. It's Okay, no, we want to do that in the use state. We want to do that in the use state. Okay, so we get the search, and then in the use state, on the use effect, sorry, in the use effect, right? What we're going to do is that we're going to set, right? If there is a search, if there's a search, right? We're going to search that as a fetch albums. We're going to search it. That's going to be the search. And I'm going to set the search term. I'm going to set the search term, to be the search, like that. Okay. And we'll need use effect. Use effect. Oh, I'm loading it from the wrong place. From here. That. And input. Did I break something? Oh, input. No, there's no input. Oh, okay. So another thing here is that, right? This is going to work only the first time. There it is. See that? And so say I do Beatles here. So Beatles. Okay. It didn't catch that change, right? Because the component already ran, right? And already rendered. And it won't render again unless we tell it that, you know, if the search term changes, I do want you to do the search again. Okay, there it is, right? So that if this changes, and it's easy say, right, it's gonna do the search and it's gonna set the term here. See that? So yeah, so that this is what we were looking for, right? So that now I can search by typing up here, right? You know, Eagles, enter, right? It searches and it sets the search term. But I want to vice versa too, right? If I type here ABBA or something and do a search, does that still work? Yeah, it does search. It looks like the search didn't quite work. Okay, no, because we're not passing, right? So here, right, when we do the click, we should pass. Now it's expecting an argument, right? It's expecting an argument, and we're going to pass here the search. Let's see if that works, right? So let's see if that's is ABBA. And now, oh, then maybe search term. Sorry, search term. Okay, so Michael Jackson. Search. There it is, right? So yeah, so now we can search either by typing here or typing here, right? Let's see, chat. There's a question in the chat. Could you explain why we had to use effect here and why it did not work with just use state? Yeah, so whenever so these two libraries, the use params and the use state, are two separate libraries, right? And they don't work together, right? So I think there might be a race condition that by the time I run the use state, I actually don't see this yet, right? So it's not set. Whereas here, I am guaranteed to, having all done that, right? And notice that it might have been that it's not defined, and this is not defined, so I don't do the search. But then when it does define, I have a check to see if it changes, like from undefined to defined, and then I do the because that change, I cause the set, right? So this is a guarantee that this will be set, if it changes from undefined, so even if there's a race condition that, by the time I get here, search is not set yet, right? Again, because these two are not guaranteed to execute in sequence, that I might not have parsed the URL yet, this guarantees it, right? So it's saying that if it does change from undefined to defined, then I will do the fetch, right? And set the search term, okay? So yeah, so I can either search from up here, right? I can search from up here, and or so if I do the search from here, notice that it searches and it updates, but notice that it's not doing the other way around, right? So if I say, hotel, and I search, it does search down here, but it's not updating the search up here. See that? Right. So we need to do that too. If we do the search and here in the fetch albums, I want to make sure that it's encoded in the URL over here so that these two are always in sync. See that? Right. So let's do that. Let's make sure that when I do a fetch search, okay, when I do this, actually, what I could do is that instead of even calling this, right, as I showed you earlier, right, it's enough for me to change this, and then it will cause the search to go through. So actually, let's do that. Right? Instead of calling the fetch search, I'm going to comment that out. Right, I'm going to remove that. I am going to programmatically change the URL because changing the URL will cause us to change and do the search and update the term. See that? Okay. So yeah, so let's do that. Okay, so to do that, there's a function called navigate, I believe, right? Yeah, so navigate allows me to set that URL at the top. So navigate. And here we can say I want to do navigate, and we can provide the URL, right, of where we want to navigate, /project/search/search term. See that? Right, and navigate imported as navigate. Okay, no, sorry, no, it's use navigate, right? And then we can instantiate it const navigate, use navigate, like that. There we go. Right, so now, right, if I do hotel and say search, notice that it updates the URL, and the URL is parsed by the search. This captures it as having changed, and then it calls the fetch albums, which fetches from the server, right, and then sending the results, and then updating the search term, right? So I can either type here, right, hotel, right, every breath you take, right? So search that, updates it over here, right, and does a search, or I can do it here, right? Clean, right? It does a search here. Okay, and so notice that if I click, it navigates to that particular song, right, or album or whatever. And if I go back, see that because it's encoded in the URL, it does a search again and then re-updates my user interface. See that? Okay. And so same thing, if I click on any of these, right, I have the tracks. If I go back, and now it remembers. I can copy this and email it to you, right? And you maybe are using a different browser, and you type that, you click on that link, and you should be able to see exactly what I was seeing, right? Because there's enough information encoded in the URL, right, to recreate the whole page. Okay. All right. Make sense? Okay. All right. So yeah, so those are two of the main screens that the project asks you to implement. You know, find a set of APIs, right, that you can build a little search page and a details page around that URL. So next, what we need to be able to do is that, you know, if I navigate to a particular album or song or whatever, I like to be able to maybe write a review or like it or hate it or whatever, right? Notice that at no point have we had the necessity to log in or register or sign up, or there's no need for a profile. So this API has no idea who I am. Well, I mean, it does because it's using the API key, right? But you know, anybody who's using this website, you know, there could be dozens, hundreds of people using the same React application, having navigated to my, you know, Netlify, and there's hundreds of people using this. None of them would have to say who they are, right? All this is all anonymous. The server on Napster has no idea who's on this end of consuming the content, right? So the next important thing is, well, how do we deal with identity, right? If I am navigating, right, and I find something and you're too and whatnot, and so now I want to be able to like this song or like this album, right? Where do I store that? You know, I need to store, right? You know, who is the person who's liking this album? I need to have some kind of representation in my database about the album, you know, the unique identity of the album, plus the relationship between the two, right? You know, the person, the album, and the fact that the person likes the album. I need to represent those three things, okay? So, and to represent a user, right, as opposed to another user, because, you know, Alice is liking this album, but then Bob is liking this album. So I need to be able to distinguish between Bob and Alice. So I need to be able to, you know, authenticate and identify the person, right? So that's going to be the focus of the next topic next week, right? Representing users, their identity, being able to log in, you know, sign up, create accounts, have a profile, and, you know, as they are navigating, right, and searching and whatnot, right, they can interact and say, oh, I like this song, and then I need to be able to capture those three things: who, what, and how is related, right? The relationship. Okay. So we'll need a table or collection that represents the users. We'll need a table or collection that represents the songs or the albums or the tracks, right? Playlists or genres. Right? And we need a table or collection that associates the two, saying, oh, Alice likes that song over there, right? And so yeah, so that'll be the focus of the upcoming lecture. Okay. Anyway, that's all I had for you today. Any questions?
Hello.
Yes.
Oh yeah, Professor. I just have a quick question concerning Netlify deploy on our, I think it's assignment 5. So I think there is a question that's posed on Piazza, but I'm encountering a similar issue to it. It deploys locally just fine. However, even though we have those environment variables set up on Netlify, we're still unable to deploy it. Because I mean
Oh,
we
yeah.
are deploying it, but there's no data concerning the core courses or the modules.
Yeah, I need to try and replicate that issue. That's that didn't happen to me last time I tried, but let me try and replicate that. I don't have an answer for you.
All right.
I will try to replicate the problem, solve it, and then I'll make a post about it.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
So here's an important question. The question is, do we need to store any of this data in our database? And I would say that in reality, the only thing you would need to store in your database is this ID, right? Because having the primary key in your database, right, would allow you to retrieve, right, the rest of the data from the remote database, their remote database. So there's no point of you replicating, all the data that someone else owns, right, into your database. Probably you'd be violating some kind of licensing agreement, right? So it would be only useful for display purposes. And so yeah, so if you're going to create a relationship between Alice and an album, well, what do you put in the album? Alice will have first name, last name, username, password, blah blah blah, all this stuff, right? What do you capture in the album? I mean, you could say that I'm going to copy all this content into the album. There's no need to, right? I would say that the only things that you might need to have is the ID and perhaps the name of the track or the album or the song or the artist, only because you want at some point, display the, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Oh. Display the tracks or display the songs or the albums. And so with the ID would be very cryptic, right? You don't know what the ID says. You would, it wouldn't be a human consumable. You can't read that and say, oh yeah, I know that song or that album. So that probably is the only two things that you might need to store in database, because it's convenient for you to query your own database and say, okay, what are all the albums that Alice likes? And so, to populate maybe in the profile, you would show all the albums that Alice likes or that she's written a review about, right? And so it'd be useful to have the names of those albums or those songs. And it would be very inconvenient having to go fetch them, because, I mean, you could always go and fetch them from the remote server. What are the names of these albums? But you'd be, if you liked, 20 songs, you would have to go 20 queries to fetch the songs of each song or album and whatnot. So it'd be much more convenient to cache, and copy some of that information into your own database, right, for a quick retrieval, right, and display it quickly in your profile. So yeah, that's all I would store in the database. And for our own data, if one user follows another user, I only store their ID, not their data. Is it correct? Right, exactly. So if you have two users are represented, you have Alice and Bob, and Alice is following Bob, right? There would be a follows collection or table, right, that has the two primary keys pointing one to Alice and pointing one to Bob, right? Enough for that. Yes. There's another question about Q3. So Q3, quiz 3 is about JavaScript and ES6, right? So, expect some questions about, arrow functions and, the spreader operator, any acronyms that have to do with JavaScript, like JSON, SPAs, what else? URLs, HTTP, anything that has to do with Node. Oh well, no, that's not. That's later. So what else? What else is JavaScript? JSON, SPA. Can't think of another one. So acronyms. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you. Good night.